Sancharchand had absolutely no involvement with respect to the said IPO. Moreover, Your Lordship, they have at no circumstance discussed the effect of the IPO or discussed any other particulars with respect to the IPO. It clearly goes to show, Your Lordship, that Sancharchand did not form a part of the formulation of the plan with respect to the said IPO. The said IPO is being conducted merely because it has been mentioned within the shareholders agreement, which was entered into between the investor shareholders and the company Southern Rocks Limited, Your Lordship. Furthermore, Your Lordship, it is humbly contended that Sancharchand does not exercise any control over Southern Rocks. Your Lordship, in the matter of ArcelorMittal versus Satish Kumar Gupta, the court had relied upon the matter of Shubhkam Ventures Limited versus the Securities and Exchange Board of India, wherein the test with respect to control had been laid down. The test, Your Lordship, herein is that for any person to be described to be in control of a company, such person must necessarily be in the driving seat. Herein, the term driving seat would connote that they must control the steering, the accelerator, the gears, as well as the brakes of the company. Moreover, Your Lordship, it has been also held that this definition of control is characterized by initiative and by a proactive behavior, Your Lordship. It cannot be merely reactive in nature. It cannot be merely defensive in nature. In the present matter, Your Lordship, referring to clauses 17.2 and 17.3 of the facility agreement, do I sense a question, Your Lordships?
Yeah, Counsel, just to clarify, you are relying on ArcelorMittal for making this point because Shubhkam didn't decide the issue before the Supreme Court. Was it really part of the ratio in ArcelorMittal, or was it a side issue? So to what extent do we rely on this issue? And is the case of ArcelorMittal even binding on before this bench?
Your Lordships, the present case is not binding before this bench, considering the quorum in the said case was it was a single judge bench of the Supreme Court. However, Your Lordship, it is necessary to note that on paragraph 52 of the said judgment, although the said judgment was with respect to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and the regulations therein, the court had clarified that they agreed and they thought that the test laid down in Shubhkam Ventures Limited was apposite and was also applicable to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Therefore, they affirmed the test that was laid down in the said matter and thereby applied it to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. It is hence contended, Your Lordship, that it can be relied upon in this matter.
Yes. If you could also help us with this, the definition of control has implications under a number of different legislation, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, Competition Law, Takeover Code, ICDR. So how do we rationalize all of these? Because how do we expect like a judgment in the IBC to apply in this particular context? Is there a commonality, or is each one have its own implications?
Indeed, Your Lordship. Barring certain regulations, most of the regulations in India follow the qualitative approach for the determination of control in India. They do not follow the quantitative or the bright line approach as has been mentioned, as is followed by various countries. Therefore, Your Lordship, it is an approach wherein the court determines whether there exists de facto control based on the facts and circumstances of each and every matter. However, Your Lordship, the test therein does apply to the said case, considering that they had determined they were looking at the term control and its connotation in general, Your Lordship. And they did affirm that its application with respect to the ICDR regulations was apposite. And thereafter, they went to hold that it was also applicable to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code.
So if they were deciding under the IBC and they made a passing mention regarding the ICDR, to what extent do we place value on that?
Your Lordships, it is necessary to note that even with respect to the Shubhkam Ventures matter, Your Lordship, the Supreme Court did not categorically differ with the opinion of the Securities Appellate Tribunal. It merely went ahead and said that since the circumstances had changed substantially, therein it was leaving the law open on that to that point, considering that the facts and the circumstances of the matter were no more required that order to be in place. However, Your Lordship. Yeah, indeed, Your Lordship.
Yeah, just finally, isn't that a bit unusual? Because normally an appellate body will not say that the decision of the lower tribunal will not be binding. But the fact that Supreme Court went to the extent of saying that it will not be binding means that they had some doubts about the veracity of that decision.
Indeed, Your Lordship. I believe, Your Lordship, these doubts stem from the position of the corporate governance norms in the country at that point in time, Your Lordship. In the earlier 2011, that is, Your Lordship, the corporate governance norms were still developing, and that is after 2011, Your Lordship, in 2013 and subsequently, as an effect of the Bhagwati Committee report and the Achyutan Committee report, we've tried to improve our norms with respect to corporate governance. And thereby we've come to the point here in your lordship, wherein ArcelorMittal in 2019 is approving what was left open in 2011, your lordship.
Have you thought of the doctrine of merger? If the order impugned was not to be a precedent, the order impugned in that appeal was also not to be a precedent. All those orders merged. Did you think of that?
Apologies, your lordship. The council couldn't follow your question. Could you please
If
repeat
the
it?
SAT order was not to be a precedent,
Correct.
the SEBI order, which was appealed before SAT, had merged into the SAT order.
Indeed, your lordship.
Therefore, is it possible to say that neither the SEBI order nor the SAT order was a precedent and the issue was left wide open?
Indeed, your lordship. The issue was left wide open until and unless it was further again, your lordship. In 2019, the issue was again closed by the Supreme Court itself, looking at the corporate governance, stage of corporate governance and the direction that India was leading in. Your lordship, that is the direction that we've taken. To bring to your lordship's notice, we were to adopt, your lordship, also in 2015, the Bright Line test. It was suggested by the Securities and Exchange Board of India in its discussion paper with respect to the Bright Line test.
That is not law. Discussion papers
Indeed,
are
your
not
lordship.
law. So what's the point?
Indeed, your lordship. However, it goes
What
to
is the
the
direction
intent.
of the country? As judges, we can't take note of some direction.
Indeed, your
Different
lordship.
people have different views on directions the country is headed in.
Indeed, your lordship. But considering the fact that this is the five-judge bench of the apex court, the apex court must be directed by strong rationale, as this court is, and based on the circumstances that are prevailing in the country and the needs of the country. Based on that, your lordship, it is required of this court that they do crystallize the matter with respect to control and who should be held to be a promoter, considering that the regulations themselves take a qualitative approach and they don't take a bright line approach, as has been mentioned.
So you made a reference to the word influence. Where is that coming from? Where is
In
the
the
term
matter of,
influence?
indeed, your lordship. The term influence has been drawn from the matter of ArcelorMittal itself, your lordship, wherein they were referring to positive influence, either direct or indirect, leading to said control, your lordship. However, in the present matter, indeed.
Sorry, counsel, just quickly, just on the facts of this case,
Indeed,
the issue of control is whether the right to appoint the CEO is controlled. Is that correct?
not only the CEO, your lordship, also other
Okay.
key transitive persons.
Okay, other rights. But let's just take the right to appoint CEO.
Indeed.
The CEO is the main person who directs the company, is the kind of overall in charge of the company. So if I have the right to appoint and say who the CEO is, doesn't that give me the right to control? And if the argument is that that particular right is not control, it's simply protective. It's, you don't have the steering wheel and all those other phrases. Then is there any right on its own which could be deemed to be moving into control? Because then all of them are rights such as this, which have the ability just to give me certain protections. Wouldn't the argument be that there may be certain rights which you can look at, but certainly the right to appoint the CEO or certain other rights actually say you are in control?
Your lordships, with a specific reference to the factual matrix, with reference to clause 17.2 and 17.3, it is necessary to be noted that Consortium did not have the right to appoint the CEO or the CFO. Moreover, the MD or the independent directors, they merely had an affirmative vote right with respect to such appointment. Such appointments were to be made by the company themselves. That is, Southern Rocks would make such appointments, and thereafter they would be an affirmative vote right or a veto right was given to the said company Sansar Chand, your lordship. It has been held in the matter of Shubhkam Ventures Limited itself that an affirmative vote right would not be classified as giving control to a particular company, considering that it's really reactive. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, look, I think on Shubhkam, I think this court has already concluded in the past that that is not precedent we would like to look at. So I think keeping aside Shubhkam, I think the issue is if you have just a veto right or an affirmative right, but practically and effectively, then no person can get appointed as CEO unless I like them and they are to my liking. Doesn't that give me some kind of a de facto control over the company?
Your lordship, it may amount to a reactive control. However, it is necessary to look at proactive control in the present matter. Moreover, with respect to Shubham Ventures not applying Your Lordship, even in the matter of Kamath, in the Kamath Hotels Limited, it has been held that certain affirmative vote rights or the rights with respect to receiving an annual business plan does not constitute to be control under the definition of the ICDR regulations. For the mere reason being, indeed, Your Lordship.
Okay,
No,
so
that's fine. Listen, I apologize. I think we're taking up a lot of your time on this particular control argument. Just go ahead. I think.
Councillor, I have a question on control. Sorry about that. So, given the facts of the case here, wasn't intention relevant? It seems like Sansad Chan, about 60 odd % of the loan book is this loan which has been given to this company, right? And most of the borrowings or the funds raised by this company or the business set up by this company, at least in the initial stage, was through this loan. Wasn't the intention that this is not just another NBFC which is giving out large number of loans to a large number of borrowers, but specifically for this business, maybe this NBFC was set up?
Indeed, Your Lordship, it is extremely necessary to look at the intention of the parties. In that reference, Your Lordship, the Council seeks to rely upon the matter of Sandeep Savay versus the Securities and Exchange Board of India, wherein the court had the Securities Appellate Tribunal had categorically held that it was absolutely necessary to look at the intentions of the parties. Because as long as rights existed within the agreement, therein a facility agreement also, within a facility agreement itself, they would not amount to control in any form. They needed to be exercised. As long as they were not exercised in any way, they were mere paper conditions only. Even in the present matter, Your Lordship, it is necessary to note that there is one instance wherein Sansar Chand, as has been mentioned in the factual matrix, wherein Sansar Chand has exercised certain rights with respect to the facility agreement. But even in such exercise, Your Lordship, there's a complete disregard with respect to the procedure that has been laid down in the facility agreement itself. They have not exercised their right to give suggestions in any form. They have not exercised their right to even go ahead and veto. Like they have only informally communicated that they are not very satisfied with the appointment that has been made. And after that, Southern Rocks themselves went and appointed someone else to their satisfaction. And they have merely approved, as has been done by Southern Rocks, and hence have not interfered in the operations of Southern Rocks in any way or form, Your Lordship. Moreover, Your Lordship, to define as to what the intention was with respect to the lender protection rights, it's necessary to look at the commercial transaction itself. Your Lordship, in the present matter, the transaction is extremely risky, considering that the facility agreement, at least as per the factual matrix, was not backed by any identifiable collateral, making the transaction risky. Moreover, Your Lordship, with respect to market risks that apply specifically with respect to the hotel industry, it is necessary to know it is a luxury industry and has extreme market risk, considering it's extremely volatile in nature and has an elastic demand. Lastly, Your Lordship, furthermore, the risk with respect to the transaction was amplified only and only because Southern Rocks at some points in time had failed to comply with the said provisions of the facility agreement. And that is the only reason as to why Sansar Chand had to include certain lender protection rights so as to ensure and to protect its interest within the facility agreement. There was absolutely no intention with respect to usurping control in the said company, and its non-involvement in the entire IPO process goes to show this, Your Lordship. If Your Lordships have no further questions with respect to this sub-issue, the Council seeks permission to proceed to the next limb of this argument.
Yes. We see that your time is up, so maybe you can take about a minute to summarize your argument on the other point, and then we can come back later on your rebuttal if you'd like. If it's okay with my brother judges.
Yeah. Please.
We took a lot of their time. Let's give him about 2-3 more minutes.
Yeah.
Much obliged, Your Lordship. Your Lordships, with respect to the second limb of the argument, it is humbly contended that Mr. Aham Nagaraj is not likely to be disqualified from the position of being the managing director at Southern Rocks. Your Lordships, for this, it's necessary to look at sections 167 or 164 of the Companies Act, which talks about disqualification. With respect to section 164, any director who is a director on the board of directors of a company which has failed to file its financial statements for a consecutive period of 3 years shall be disqualified from being reappointed on the board of such defaulting company or being appointed on the board of any other company. Lordships, looking at the automatic vacation provisions that are present under section 167, section 167 provides that any person who is disqualified under section 164 shall vacate his office as being the director therein. Your Lordships, it's necessary to note that an important amendment was introduced to the said provision in 2018. By the said amendment, Your Lordship, a new proviso was added to section 167, which read as any person who is disqualified with respect to being a director under section 164 shall vacate his office with respect to all companies and shall, other than the defaulting company. It is necessary to note, Your Lordship, that the said amendment was effective from the 7th of May 2018. In the present matter, Mr. Aham Nagraj is the managing director at Southern Rocks, but is also a non-executive director on the board of a company called Nero Private Limited, which has failed to file its financial statements for a consecutive period of financial years ending 2016, 2017, and 2018. It is humbly contended, Your Lordship, that since the said proviso which was added by the amendment of 2018 must necessarily operate prospectively, considering that it's penal in nature and not merely disqualificatory or clarificatory, in such a circumstance, Your Lordship, Section 164 with respect to the 2013 Act shall squarely apply to the present matter, and Mr. Aham Nagraj shall not be disqualified and shall not vacate his office in Southern Rocks Limited. If Your Lordships have no queries, the Council shall proceed to the last part of the argument, Your Lordship.
Council, one question. 167 is binary, right? I mean, if you're disqualified, you're disqualified. So why have you come to us with that argument that somebody is not disqualified?
Your Lordship, the contention is not with respect to the disqualification Nero Company Limited. It's with respect to the disqualification Southern Rocks. Looking at the applicability of the proviso which was added to the said provisions. Your Lordships, the said proviso was added on the 7th of May 2018. The question is as to whether the proviso will apply prospectively or may apply retrospectively to defaults and disqualifications that have happened prior to the said amendment being introduced. It is humbly contended by the effect of said amendment, Your Lordship, any director who has been disqualified.
Council, just in the interest of time, I'll be specific. So then why do you need a risk factor? If you're so sure that the person is not disqualified to act on the board of the IPO company, then why was a risk factor?
Your Lordships, it's with respect to making adequate disclosure. So disqualification was already, although the factual matrix is silent with respect to the MCA, that is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, releasing a list with respect to this. However, Your Lordships, it's merely for the purposes of making an adequate disclosure to the public that there is this possibility due to this Nero Company Limited. However, since the application of the said proviso was not conclusively decided by the Supreme Court of India, that is the apex body in India, the question with respect to law was still open in the present matter, Your Lordship. There are several high courts who have held that have contravening opinions with respect to the application, Your Lordship.
Sure, thank you.
Much obliged, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, with respect to the said contention, concluding with the last point, Your Lordship, it is humbly contended that the said proviso must necessarily operate prospectively and cannot operate retrospectively, considering that it's purely penal in nature. Your Lordships, there have been certain observations made by certain high courts wherein they have tried to hold that the said proviso may be retrospective in nature or may have a retrospective application. However, Your Lordship, it's necessary to note that in the matter of Naresh Kumar Poddar, as well as several other judgments, including Mukut Pathak versus the Union of India and several other judgments, the courts have categorically held that even if we were to look at a disqualificatory provision applying retrospectively in certain situations, it was necessary to be decided from a fact-to-fact basis and from a law-to-law basis. In the present matter, Your Lordship, it was held that the said proviso which was added via the amendment could in no way be put under the toothless domain of being a disqualificatory provision. It hit the integrity and the goodwill of every director, and it penalized them by not allowing them to be directors for a consecutive period of 5 years. It is penal in nature, Your Lordship, and must operate prospectively and shall not affect the disqualification of Mr. Aham Nagraj. It is therefore submitted, Your Lordship, that that Sansar Chand cannot be classified as the promoter of Southern Rocks, and that Mr. Aham Nagraj shall not be disqualified from being the said managing director at Southern Rocks, and therefore the rejection of the draft red hearing prospectus by the Securities and Exchange Board of India was not justified, Your Lordship. If this council cannot assist this court any further, my co-counsel shall be dealing with the other two issues.
Yeah.
Much obliged, Your Lordships.
The council seeks permission to commence the pleadings in this virtual platform. Pleadings to the bench. The council seeks permission to collectively address the bench as Your Lordships. Much obliged, Your Lordships. This is the second council for the appellants in the present matter. The council shall be dealing with appeal number 1 and appeal number 3. If Your Lordships do not have any preliminary objection, the council seeks permission to proceed to appeal number 1. Much obliged. Your Lordship, appeal number 1 is with respect to whether the termination of offer agreement by Pacific Crest was valid. The present appeal arises from the SAT order, which had overturned the SEBI order, declaring that Pacific Crest has acted malafidely and unreasonably and not obliged with its duty under SEBI's merchant banker regulations. Your Lordships, the Council first contends that the termination of offer agreement was invalid in nature. Your Lordships, the said contention shall be sought in twofold manner. Firstly, that adverses did not have any material or long-term impact on the object of the offer agreement, and moreover, Pacific Crest has unreasonably and malafidely invoked the offer agreement, thereby violating the duties of a merchant banker. Your Lordships, with reference to para 28 of the written submission, as it has been held in the case of Grupo Urvaso versus Carry Value Added, that there are two essentials before the invocation of a material adverse change clause. Firstly, that the alleged event must be material and significant enough to satisfy the threshold of materiality. Moreover, the alleged event must have a long-term and lasting disastrous impact so as to affect the ability of the company to perform the agreement itself. Your Lordships, as it can be very well averred from the factual matrix that adverses had affected the coastal regions of India. From the diverse portfolio that Southern Rocks had, we had 10 small and medium luxury hotels and 4 business hotels, out of which only 4 were located in the coastal regions. In spite of all these conditions, Southern Rocks till date has not breached any of its financial and operational covenants. This goes on to imply, Your Lordship, that Southern Rocks had a steady revenue. Moreover, Your Lordships, it has been established in many precedents that mere fluctuations in cash flow projections or EBITDA of the company does not go on to reflect on the long-term financials of the company, Your Lordships. Your Lordships, as Your Lordships can refer from the graph which is on page 8 of the compromise, Southern Rocks was a growing company with a steady revenue record. Hence, Your Lordship, it's very clear that investment decisions, which are usually based on historical records of the company, that Southern Rocks would have been a very lucrative investment for the investors in terms with the perspective of long-term capital gains, Your Lordships.
Counsel, may I interrupt here? So
Yes,
you mentioned cases like Grupo Hotelero and other cases. What are the facts? I don't mean the detailed facts, but what kind of transactions were involved there? And do they match with the type of transaction we are looking at here?
I understand Your Lordship's concerns that these particular cases deal with M&A transactions.
Yes, absolutely.
However, Your Lordship, the Council would like to state that the present Council is not deriving from the particular facts of the case. MAC clause is invoked on a case-to-case basis. However, the particular essence of MAC clause remains the same, that materiality and long-term effect must be proved.
Yeah.
The Council,
I see where you're coming from. Apologies for interrupting, but I can understand entirely why long-term nature of the damage is important in an M&A transaction, because somebody is buying a company. Whereas here we are talking about an IPO within a certain period of time, which doesn't really matter, because it's not like one company is buying another company. It's about doing a transaction within a particular period of time. And an IPO now is different from an IPO 6 months later, because the whole logistics and the markets may have changed. But so therefore, my question is, in the context of an IPO, is it not incongruous to bring in the long-term nature? So to draw the examples from M&A doesn't somehow seem convincing to us.
I understand Your Lordship's concern, Your Lordship. The Council would like to state here that even the short-term financials of Southern Rocks were not affected by adverses itself. Therefore, Pacific Crest to invoke MAC clause stating that long-term financials of Southern Rocks would be affected seems hasty in nature and unreasonable in nature. And that is what the contention of Council is, that they have invoked the material adverse change clause hastily, unreasonably, without considering the effect of adverses on the IPO process of Southern Rocks. Your Lordship, IPO and the subscription of shares is based on the historical revenue records of the company. And it's very clear that Southern Rocks had a yes, Your Lordship.
Yeah.
Your Lordship.
But Counsel, isn't that we have to look at the finances of the company, which may or may not have been affected. But IPO is heavily market driven. So how can a IPO be carried out when the market is in the doldrums? Isn't that does that not go to the heart of the transaction? So if you look at contextually, So
Yes.
looking at it technically, I see where your argument is coming from, but don't we have to look at it contextually? The transaction is about an IPO, and is the fact that the market has gone down because of these circumstances not undermine the transaction itself?
Agreed, Your Lordship. Even if the council would consider Your Lordship's contentions, then still Pacific Crest has violated its duties under its merchant banker regulations. Since under clause 13, it was duty bound to advise Southern Rocks with respect to the IPO process, such as other alternatives which existed with respect to the IPO, shifting the IPO to other date, or reducing the issue size, or possible disclosures which happened that the investors were not favoring the IPO of Southern Rocks. These disclosures were not made by Pacific Crest to Southern Rocks, and goes on to show the malified nature and their conflict with respect to the SEBI merchant banker regulation, Your Lordship.
So are we to take it that you're not pressing a material adverse change argument, but rather you're pressing the argument relating to the regulations and the conduct of the merchant banker?
Your Lordship, the council still contends that there has been no material change with respect to the objective of the offer agreement, which was subscription of shares. The council still believes that Southern Rocks is a growing company and would have gotten IPO subscription. But there is another alternative agreement that even if Your Lordship would disregard the material effect, still Pacific Crest is in violation of its merchant banker regulation and has unreasonably and malafidely invoked the MAC clause, Your Lordship.
So yes, please proceed. Thank you.
Much obliged, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, as it has been held in various cases, that reasonable diligence is one that a prudent man exercises in the conduct of its own affairs. Your Lordship, as the council has already reiterated, that Pacific Crest did not advise Southern Rocks with respect to other alternatives, such as changing the issue size or probably increasing the IPO date. Additionally, Your Lordship, it has been held in the case of Frontier Oil Corporation versus Holly Oil Corporation that a mere speculation cannot satisfy the threshold of an MAC. Your Lordship, in the present case, Pacific Crest has invoked the material adverse change clause by relying on a mere speculative report published by Libgen LLP, which does not go on to analyze the specific effect of adverses on Southern Rocks, and moreover was published mere 10 days after the outbreak of adversus virus. This goes on to show that the same report did not rely on any empirical data or expert testimony. Hence, Your Lordship, this goes on to show that Pacific Crest has not validly calculated the effect of adversus on the IPO of Southern Rocks and has invoked the material adverse change clause in a hasty manner.
So sorry, counsel, apologies. So again, just to come back to what my brother judge had just said, is your argument that the invoking the material adverse effect clause was not justified because of markets, etc.? Or is the argument that invoking the material adverse effect clause was not ethical under the merchant banking regulations? Because those are two separate arguments. And I don't know if the SEBI order actually took into account the first. I wanted to, because it's the technicality is violation of merchant banking regulations and the code of conduct. So you need to lead me through the code of conduct to say why the code of conduct was violated and why you believe it was violated, and as opposed to that. So if you could help us out on that.
Yes, Your Lordship, I understand your concern, and the council will subsequently address the codes which have been violated by Pacific Crest. Your Lordship, under the SEBI's merchant banker regulation, Pacific Crest was duty bound to not indulge in any kind of conflict of interest. With reference to para 11 of the compromise, Pacific Crest, by going ahead and negotiating with Fig Leaf, which was a competitor of Southern Rocks, while also negotiating with Southern Rocks, goes on to show that they have had a conflict of interest. Moreover, Your Lordship, Pacific Crest went ahead and gauged the response of certain favorable investors. The same disclosure.
Sorry, my brother was asking a question about MAC. So are you conceding that the question of MAC is irrelevant to your argument? Because you're answering something else now. So please address this question first. Then
Apologies, Your Lordship. The council here, the contention and the prayer of the council here is to uphold the SEBI MB order, which stated that Pacific Crest has unreasonably and malafidely invoked the MAC clause. The first prong of the council's argument is that they have invoked the material adverse change clause unreasonably because there was no material effect on the objective of the offer agreement. Secondly, Your Lordship, the council contends that there is malified and violation of SEBI's merchant banker regulation. If your lordship has any further
No,
queries.
no. So the question is, MAC is an issue of contract between two parties. How is that of any relevance in this argument at all? Is the question. You need to address that.
Yes, your lordship. This is with reference because the SEBI has particularly addressed this point in its order that Pacific Crest has malafidely invoked the MAC clause and violated the duties of a merchant banker regulation. The materiality and the unreasonable part of the council's arguments is a mere arguendo, and the council will subsequently go on to show that how Pacific Crest has violated the duties of a merchant banker, your lordship. If your lordships have any further query.
Okay, please go.
Yes, your lordship. As the council was further telling that your lordship, when Pacific Crest went ahead and gauged the response of certain investor shareholders with respect to them favoring the IPO Fig Leaf, they did not make this disclosure to Southern Rocks, thereby violating the clause 6 of Schedule 3 of Merchant Banker Regulations. Moreover, your lordship, they did not even advise Southern Rocks with respect to any kind of risk which was there with the IPO process. It is the council's contention that they have malafidely invoked the material adverse change clause as an excuse to go ahead and serve a competitor of Southern Rock. Additionally, your lordships, whenever a MAC clause is invoked, it must be done in good faith and fairly. The malafide of Pacific Crest is so visible that it went ahead and invoked the MAC clause just 2 days after communicating its satisfaction with the effect of adversus on the financials of Southern Rock, your lordship. Moreover, your lordships, even the Association of Eminent Investment Bankers, which is a registered society with SEBI and involved in the day-to-day operations of the capital markets, and even the chief regulator itself condemns its action. Your lordship, therefore, the council would like to submit that Pacific Crest has invoked the material adverse change clause malafidely, and this goes on to violate the essential duty and statutory duty that they had towards Southern Rock under SEBI's merchant banker regulation. If your lordships do not have any further queries, the council would like to proceed to appeal 3.
Council, I have a question. You are assuming that they had a malafide intent and that was because they wanted to undertake IPO of or act in the IPO of Fig Leaf. Why can't they do both the IPOs?
Your lordship, the council is not contending the ability of Pacific Crest to go ahead and contract with another party. The council is merely contending that they have violated the duties which they owed to their contractual partners, which is Southern Rocks, under the SEBI's merchant banker regulations, and also invoked the termination clause unreasonably, only with the interest of going ahead and hastily going ahead and serving its competitor Fig Leaf, your lordship.
But that's the point. They can serve the competitor Fig Leaf any which way. Why do they need to terminate the agreement for that?
Your lordship, because the termination clause states that in case a termination has been made for any other reason except the MAC clause, Pacific Crest would be barred from undertaking an IPO of a competitor for around the next.
Sorry, I'll repeat the question. They can go ahead and do the second transaction as well with Fig Leaf. They don't need to terminate the contract for it. Is there any exclusivity in the contract?
No, your lordship. The apology in the lordship of the council contention came off wrong. The council is merely contending that the termination was unreasonable. The council mentioned Fig Leaf to show that there was conflict with respect to the intention of Pacific Crest, your lordship.
Conflict can be addressed as per the code of conduct, right? It should be avoided, otherwise disclosed. So there could be a disclosure on that. Merchant bankers are in the business of marketing securities. They work for several clients at the same point of time. Your argument is based on the point that Pacific Crest could not have undertaken both the IPOs.
Apologies, your lordship. The council would like to again reiterate a contention that the council is not contending that Pacific Crest could not have undertaken both the IPOs. The council is contending that because certain disclosures and the problem in conflict was not disclosed to Southern Rock, there is a malified intention. Additional to that, Pacific Crest has also violated numerous other provisions of code of conduct under SEBI's merchant banker regulations, and therefore the said termination is not valid.
So we are now moving to disclosure of conflict, or rather lack of disclosure of conflict. You have not shown us facts that Pacific Crest was actually appointed by Fig Leaf for it to have made the disclosure.
Your lordships, because this appeal comes from a SEBI order, the council believes that SEBI would have ground checked these facts. However, the present compromise is silent on these facts. But both SEBI and the Association of Investment Bankers have condemned the action of Pacific Crest. This goes on to show that they did indeed have an agreement with Fig Leaf, Your Lordship, which went on yes, Your Lordship.
Wasn't there a newspaper report, a press note announced by Fig Leaf that they are in an advanced stage, and does that involve the same merchant banker?
Yes, Your Lordship.
Which you can then say you were not made aware of.
Yes, Your Lordship, that is the council's contention that that they were negotiating with Fig Leaf was not disclosed to the clients of the council, Your Lordship, and moreover that these Pacific Crest went ahead and gauged the response of investors was also not disclosed to Southern Rocks. If Pacific Crest would have went ahead and advised Southern Rocks with respect to the risk which Southern Rocks had with respect to the non-favorability of investors to IPO of Southern Rocks, probably Southern Rocks could have taken certain mitigating effects. But
those are unsubstantiated news reports. Can we rely on that?
Your Lordship, the council would like to again state that SEBI has passed this order, and even SAT has passed SEBI has passed this order, and SAT has passed the order, and under Section 15I of the SEBI Act, SEBI has the power to take evidences, and the council is sure that SEBI must have done its due diligence.
Okay, SEBI's order could be bad in law, no? We are sitting in appeal, so.
To Your Lordship, but I believe that the chief market regulator did investigate the facts and therefore passed the order, set order.
And you don't need an appellate forum at all.
Yes, Your Lordship, the council is not contending the facts of the present case and is merely contending the law. If Your Lordship do not...
One final question on this. Is a merchant banker free to quit or no? Your Lordship, a service contract. Is a service provider bound to continue?
No, Your Lordship, but in the present contract, if Pacific Crest would have quit without invoking the MEC clause for any other reason, they would have been barred for barred to act on the IPO of another competitor for 3 months, and that is why they have used the MEC clause as an excuse, and therefore this goes on to show the malified intention, Your Lordship.
So the MEC is at the heart of the matter.
Yes, Your Lordship. If Your Lordships do not have any further query, the council would like to move ahead with Appeal 3. Your Lordships, Appeal 3 concerns with whether the rejection of the class action suit filed by the investor shareholders was valid or not. The council contends that the NCLT and NCLAT had validly rejected the class action suit. The said contention is sought to be Your Lordship, the council apologizes. The council contends that the rejection of the said class action suit was not valid, and the said contention shall be sought to be proved in a threefold manner. Firstly, that the investor shareholders constitute a class under Section 245. Moreover, that the right of first refusal is prejudicial to the interest of the investor shareholders. And secondly, Your Lordship, that ROFR is ultra vires to the Articles of Association of Southern Rocks. Firstly, Your Lordship, the council would like to state that under Section 245 and with reference to Rule 84 of NCLT Second Amendment Act, the threshold of bringing a class action suit is 5% of the shareholding. The investor shareholders in the present case have around 74% of shareholdings of Southern Rocks, and therefore qualify within the meaning of class and can bring an action under Section 245 of the Companies Act. Moreover, Your Lordships, it is contended that under Section 245, prejudicial conduct must be with respect to the management or affairs of the company. Your Lordships, it is contended that prejudice signifies a conduct which is detrimental to one's legal affairs, one's legal rights. And moreover, in the context of a company, it is whenever there is a breach of the terms on which the company was agreed to be conducted or its management was agreed to be conducted, it amounts to prejudice. Your Lordship, moreover, it has been held in the case of House of Lords, in the case of O'Neill versus Phillips by the House of Lords, that whenever a conduct which lacks in probity and involves a visible departure of fair dealing, it amounts to prejudice. Firstly, Your Lordship, the council would like to state that Mr. Aham and Ms. Brahmasmi had not disclosed the fact of a conflicting right of first refusal given to O' Prime Tier. If this particular right is realized, this would mean that O prime tier would be holding 10% of shareholding of Southern Rocks and would be classified as a promoter. This goes on to show that two provisions of the Articles of Association would be violated, and those were the two essential provisions on which the investor shareholders agreed to invest in Southern Rocks. Firstly, that Southern Rocks would no longer be a professional.
Sorry to interrupt here. So, because one of the points before we get to the facts, if you can help us understand the legal test required for invoking 245. You mentioned there needs to be prejudice. Are you contending that prejudice here has been caused to the company or to the members of the company?
To the members of the company, Your Lordship.
Okay, and you mentioned O'Neill and Phillips and so on. So there is a pretty high bar to be shown that there has been prejudice, right? So merely because there's a non-disclosure of the agreement that has been entered into, does that amount to prejudice that's caused? Because if you're relying on the English line of cases, and there are some Indian line of cases as well, the conduct has to be harsh, burdensome, and so on. So mere non-disclosure seems to be something very trivial compared to what the test might require.
Yes, Your Lordship, but the council would like to clarify that harsh, burdensome with respect to oppression. Section 245 states prejudice. Prejudice goes on to mean that whenever there is a detrimental effect to one's legal right, or whenever the economic interest of shareholders of the company itself is violated.
So are you then suggesting that O'Neill was, so you relied on O'Neill versus Phillips, which is an unfair prejudice kind of case.
Yes,
so would that be applicable in the 245 context, or is that only for oppression and prejudice under 241?
Your Lordship,
because that's a dual mutually conflicting argument. So if you rely on O'Neill, then you have to accept the oppression argument. Otherwise, you have to apply a different test for 245.
Your Lordship, the council would say that the jurisprudence in India is still new with respect to 245. Statutorily, it is only mentioned prejudice. However, the council would like to state that there is also unfairness in the conduct if we go on to apply the unfairness test as well. But the test of oppression must not be established in the present case, Your Lordship. And the council would like to state that even if one were to consider in some cases, as it has been held, that prejudice is when there is an economical detriment to the interest of the shareholders of the company. In the present case, if the ROFR was realized, there would be the O prime tier would have 10% of shareholdings of Southern Rocks. Hence, Southern Rocks would cease to be a professionally managed company. It again would not be allowed to go for the IPO process, and the interest of investor shareholders with respect to the shares of Southern Rocks would be affected. Moreover, Your Lordships, it also affects the right of first refusal which investor shareholders had within the AOA of the company. Hence, Your Lordship, it's very clear that the very terms and conditions on which the investors invested in Southern Rocks were violated because of the presence of the said ROFR, Your Lordship.
Counsel, just before we, you argued on the facts, but in one nutshell, what would you recommend? And you mentioned that 245 has not come before the court. We have the opportunity to rule on it. What do you think we should define to be the meaning of prejudice under Section 245?
Your Lordship, it is for the Lordships to decide, but the council would like to state that
with your assistance.
Yes, Your Lordships, as it has been previously held in some of the cases with respect to 241 and 242, where Supreme Court has held unfair prejudice to be with respect to the economical interest of the company or shareholders, the council would state that the same should be applied here. And even if the same is done, the economic interest of investor shareholders in Southern Rocks is being affected.
Is that not too wide a test? Anything that economically affects the investors, it does prejudice. We will be flooded with 245 cases day in and day out.
Your Lordships, even the Lordships can consider that the terms on which the investor shareholders or a particular shareholder invests in the company, or their expectations or promises with respect to a particular, when investing in a particular company is violated, that would amount to prejudice. And the same case happens here when, due to the non-disclosure of the ROFR or the presence of a conflicting ROFR in the company, also Your Lordship, the intent of Mr. Aham and Brahmasmi and the fraudulent intent of the Mr. Aham and Brahmasmi is very clear. Since they failed to first disclose the ROFR, again, they took around 10 days to give a copy of the AOSHA, and they have additionally not disclosed the fact that Mr. Aham, that with respect to the disqualification of Mr. Aham as the managing director of Southern Rocks. This goes on to show, Your Lordship, that there has been a continuous prejudicial conduct with respect to the interest of investor shareholders in Southern Rocks, Your Lordships. If Your Lordship has any further query, the council would like to. Yeah, moreover, Your Lordship, the council would like to also state that under Section 245 Clause 2A, a company can bring an action under the particular section so as to restrain any act which is ultra vires to the articles of the company. Since the present ROFR is ultra vires to the articles of the company, the investor shareholders are well within the right to bring an action under this section, and under section 245G, the investor shareholders can ask for the nullification of the said ROFR and also compensation because of the fraudulent, continuous fraudulent conduct of Mr. Aham and Brahmas, your lordship. If your lordships do not have any further queries, the council would like to move to the last limb of our argument.
I just had one question. Does this jurisdiction enable rewriting a contract?
No, your lordship, but under section 245G, the investor shareholders can ask any order so as to protect their rights which are being prejudiced, and the present investor shareholders are asking for the nullification of the ROFR, your lordship.
But that's amount to rewriting the contract.
No, your lordship, even the respondents are contending that the same is dead law. So the appellants are just contending that the court may clarify the same and give an order to that effect. Since it is a dead law, it would be really gracious if the court can go ahead and declare it the same, your lordship.
What about the other party to the contract? Sorry,
Yes.
the party to the contract, which, the minority person who got the contract. Can you just nullify the contract vis-a-vis him?
Your lordship, the council is not representing Mr. Oprime and therefore cannot speak for him. But as Mr. Aham has represented in other courts, and the respondents have represented Mr. Oprime and others, NCLT and NCLT, and contended that even Mr. Oprime considers the same to be a dead law. The council's only prayer is that the court or even the appellants, respondents would be so gracious to just give an affidavit to the effect, or probably just give an order to the effect that it is a dead law, your lordship.
So you're asking the court to say that a contract between two parties, where the second party isn't even being represented here, should be declared null and void?
No, your lordship, the council's only contention is that with respect to in order to protect the interest of my client, the council is requesting the court to nullify the ROFR, which is already dead in law, as has been contended previously by the respondents in NCLT and NCLT.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, your lordships, the council would now go on to say how the present contention of the respondents, which they say that the present ROFR is dead in law, is not true, and that the present ROFR has a contractual force in law and must be nullified to protect the interest of investor shareholders. Your lordships, as has been clarified by the Supreme Court in the case of Vodafone International Holdings versus Union of India, which is para 66, that a shareholders agreement is an inter se agreement and can be enforced against the contractual parties. Moreover, your lordships, even the Bombay High Court, a two-judge bench of Bombay High Court, in the case of Bajaj Auto versus Western Maharashtra Development, which has also been reiterated by this bench of the court as well, that even a shareholders agreement which has not been permitted by the Articles of Association of a company, even that shareholders agreement will have a contractual liability. This has also been reaffirmed by the proviso to section 58(2), which goes on to say that a private inter se agreement between two shareholders will have contractual obligations. Hence, your lordship, the council contends that the ROFR is enforceable in contract, and in case it is done so, it will go on to heavily prejudice the interest of investor shareholders in Southern Rocks and violate the terms on which they invested huge amounts of money in Southern Rocks, your lordships. Therefore, the only submission and prayer of this council is that the lordships be kind enough to nullify the same. If your lordships do not have any further query, the council would like to move on to the prayer.
The prayer is on record, so I think it should be fine. Thank you.
Okay. It was indeed a pleasure pleading before this bench, your lordships.
Should we give the same amount of time to the other team as well?
That's right.
Yeah, so maybe the court officer can allocate the same amount of time, because we gave extra time for this team.
Yeah, including questions at the same time.
Yeah.
Sure, sir. We'll do that. But we'll be showing the time at 10, 5, and 2 minutes. And then whatever extra time is there, we'll note it down. But we'll be showing the time breaks at 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and 2 minutes.
Yeah, why don't you the time breaks as you plan, and then say extra time starts now. If
All
that's more
right, sir.
convenient for you. Yeah. Okay.
Sure, sir.
May it please the court, we're the counsel for the respondents. I'm the counsel number 1 appearing for SEBI in respect of appeal number 2. My co-counsel is appearing for the respective respondents in appeals number 1 and 3. Your Lordships, we acquiesce in the jurisdiction of this Honorable Court under Section 15Z of the SEBI Act and Section 423 of the Companies Act, and therefore we shall be making our submissions on the merits directly and against the contentions taken by the appellants, if it so pleases this Honorable Court. I shall proceed to my submissions then, Your Lordships. Your Lordships, appeal number 2 is whether or not the order of SEBI rejecting the draft red herring prospectus of the appellant was justified. Now, Your Lordships, this particular appeal has 2 issues. The first issue being whether Sansar Chand Finance Limited is a promoter. And secondly, whether Mr. Aham Nagraj, who is the managing director of Southern Rocks, SR, is potentially disqualified from being director. We shall be dealing with the appeal in these 2 limbs. On the first issue, Your Lordship, that is whether SCFL is a promoter, we shall be contending to the affirmative. And this is based on 3 limbs. The first limb being that agreements can also confer control. The second limb being the facility agreement entered into between SR and SCFL, Sansar Chand Finance Limited, confers control to Sansar Chand Finance Limited. And a third limb is a short limb, and we shall be contending that therefore Sansar Chand Finance Limited is a promoter. Your Lordships, on the first limb, that is agreements can also confer control. Your Lordships, a plain reading of Regulation 2, Subregulation 1, Clause E of SAST, that is Substantial Acquisition of Shares and Takeover Regulations, which we are referred to by the ICDR, tells us that control is an inclusive definition. Now, the inclusive definition also includes the power to control policy decisions and management decisions. Also, Your Lordships, the section does not stop there and goes further and says that such rights can be conferred either by the virtue of their shareholding or management rights, or shareholders agreements or voting agreements, or in any other manner. Therefore, Your Lordships, a plain reading of the regulation tells us that agreements may also confer control, and this has happened in multiple cases in the past. I may advert to 2 cases, Rhodia SA versus SEBI, and the case in INRE NDTV Limited. Your Lordships, having said that, in the present case, the lender and the borrower, that is SCFL and SR, have a contractual relationship by virtue of the facility agreement that is provided in Annexure A in page number 11 of the moot proposition. Your Lordships, it is a specific contention that this agreement confers control over policy decisions and management decisions within SR. Your Lordships, we say so specifically because of the nature of the clauses. If we may look at, say, clause 17.1, 17.1 refers us to certain affirmative rights that have been granted to SCFL. Your Lordships, these affirmative rights include the right to change capital structure, the right of asset subordination. In some cases, the 17.1.2 talks about raising any unsecured debt. And Your Lordship, 17.1.11 talks about declaring or paying any dividend. Stipulates that in those situations, a prior written consent of the lender shall be required. Your Lordships, in a previous case, that is INRE NDTV Limited, the SAT in that case also had occasion to deal with a similar loan agreement which had similar clauses. In that case, Your Lordships, the following matters relating to RRPR, which was the holding company of NDTV Limited, would require the prior consent of VCPL, who was a lender in that case. This included amending charter documents. This also included mergers, amalgamations, consolidations. It included setting up subsidies. It included sale, transfer, or creation of any encumbrance on the equity securities of RRPR, substantially very similar to the various clauses that are provided.
You're referring to a SEBI order.
We are referring to the SAT appeal over the SEBI order. The SEBI order is as well, Your Lordship.
Yeah, but will that bind us?
It will certainly not bind your lordships. However, the decision is reasonable, and therefore we urge your lordships that this is the rationale that may be applied, even in the present case.
Where is the SAT order on the matter of control? There isn't one.
There certainly isn't, your lordship. In fact, the appellants have quoted the case of Shubhkam Ventures. Now, the ratio of Shubhkam Ventures is that negative veto rights do not amount to control. However, your lordships, a three-judge bench of this honorable court had rendered the ratio of that case inoperative. Thereafter, the appellants have taken the contention that the same ratio has been used in the case of ArcelorMittal. However, for two reasons, the ratio is still not binding, your lordship, and in that case, it has perhaps been misplaced in its usage. The reason is, your lordship, firstly, ArcelorMittal is a two-judge bench decision. The three-judge bench decision of this honorable court will still be binding. That is, the ratio is inoperative. Secondly,
is there a ratio in the three-judge decision?
There certainly isn't a ratio in the three-judge bench decision, your lordship.
So why would a two-judge decision endorsing Shubhkam have a problem from the three-judge decision? There is no decision in the three-judge decision.
But your lordship, the three-judge bench deemed it in the interest of justice, in the interest of doing complete justice, that the ratio in that case must be nullified for the simple reason that it must not cause.
Would that not include the ratio of what was impugned before SAT? You're literally saying the three-judge decision set aside the SAT order. That's the effect of your argument.
Your lordship, in fact, we are specifically stating that Shubhkam Ventures, the ratio in Shubhkam Ventures cannot be applied. It is inoperative. And so the ratio in that case, that is negative veto rights, do not confer control, may not be the right proposition. It is yet to be decided by this court.
So if it is yet to be decided, you can't say that it has been decided as being inapplicable. It's a completely open issue.
It certainly is, your lordship.
Having left it completely open, if in ArcelorMittal this said, this is the way to review control, in a provision in pari materia to this, would that bind us? Would that hold our hands? Would that tie us up?
Your lordship, in that respect, my second fold of the argument against ArcelorMittal will apply, which is that ArcelorMittal refers specifically to Section 29A of the IBC and control in that context. Your lordship, the purport of Section 29A of IBC is completely different. The purport of Section 29A is to ensure that promoters of previously insolvent companies should not be allowed to bid for their companies once again. The ratio, the control in that context is very different from the control in the context of disclosure during an issue, during an IPO. Your lordship,
can you elaborate the difference? Both are promoters. In both situations, it's about a person who's in control over a company that went bust should not be allowed to revive that company. Whereas here is a person who's in control of the company, should be properly disclosed. In fact, this would be in aid of a future IBC, no?
Your lordship,
objectives are aligned, it seems to me.
Your lordship, similarly, the word control may also be used in a third context. Let us say in the Competition Act 2002. However, your lordship, we must look at the purport of the use of the word control in these various provisions. SAT in a previous decision.
Yeah, if I may add to my learned brother judge, I think there are two concerns that you need to satisfy us on. I think first concern has been raised very clearly. You are trying to persuade us to rely on a SEBI order in the NDTV case when there's clearly a Supreme Court decision in the ArcelorMittal case. And secondly, as my learned brother judge says, yes, we recognize that there's a difference in the objective of the two legislation, but you need to persuade us, therefore, why we need different definitions of control. That we are not convinced.
Indeed, your lordship. Your lordship, here we may again look at the definition of control in ICDR. It refers to two aspects. control over policy decision, control over management decisions. Now, when we go back to the IBC, the definition of control is unclear. We do not know what amounts to control. We do not know the context of control. Your Lordships, the only flavor that may be provided to the use of the word control in 29A is that it is used for the purpose of ensuring that promoters who have lost control of their company under the IBC process do not regain it nefariously. Here in this context, Your Lordship, it is much wider. The context is much wider. It is to ensure that potential subscribers to the issue may not be misled by by any shadow director or any other person in control who may be controlling the company, even if it is slightly from the backline.
Okay, and
forgive me, Your Lordships. Your Lordships.
So sorry, you mentioned, of course, there is a difference in the scope. But again, ultimately, is it not a question of do you have control over the management of and affairs of the company? And secondly, we are a little unclear how you brought in the issue of shadow directors. Would that be relevant at all here?
Your Lordship, the word shadow director is used to refer to any person who may be in control, or any person who, according to whose advice, instructions, or directions the board may be accustomed to act. Okay. Now, this is a separate aspect of promotership.
Just to clarify,
it's not relevant, Your Lordships. Forgive me. Okay. Shadow director is not an aspect that is relevant.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Please proceed.
Much obliged, Your Lordship. Your Lordships, I was addressing this honorable court on the point of why NDTV should be relied upon, which is a more pertinent judgment, rather than Ansell or Mittal, which is not. Therefore, Your Lordship, having said to you that the purport of the use of the word control under ICDR is much wider than its use under IBC, there are various other connotations that can be given, which NDTV has in that particular case. NDTV in that particular case held that a call option exercisable by an associate could also lead to exercise of control. Your Lordship, here also there is a similar situation. I am sorry, Your Lordship, that I am jumping to a different clause within the same agreement. Annexure A 20.1 includes a new clause after the 2018 amendment on December 7th. Now, this new clause is a debt equity swap. Now, the debt equity swap brings our case today much more closer to NDTV and Rhodia than the cases that have been cited by the appellants, such as Sandeep Saway, such as perhaps Kamath Hotels, or even Jat Etihad. Your Lordship, this is because both of these cases refer to loan agreements. They're on the point. They're on the facts. Secondly, Your Lordship, in both of these cases, there is a debt equity swap. In that case, it is much more convoluted, but the effect is the same. Therefore, Your Lordships, in the case of NDTV, in paragraph 14.8, that court sat the tribunal, the Honorable Tribunal had specifically held that, if Your Lordships may permit me.
Can I draw your attention to 20.1C?
Indeed, Your Lordship. I was on 20.1.
If the equity is going to be capped at 10%, wouldn't that be a pointer to say this will not even, they can't even go to an operation court if it's capped, if it's not going to be more than 10%?
Your Lordship, however, in the present case, the question is whether it confers control.
Rather it says shall never be less than 10%. So
Your
the
Lordship,
minimum stake that they'll get is 10%. So
Indeed,
it's a pointer. It's a NDTV was RRPR would be totally owned by the lender. Whereas here there is an indicia of 10%. So how are the two comparable?
Indeed, Your Lordship. However, Your Lordship, we may also contemplate a situation where the debt that SR holds may be equal to its total authorized share capital.
On that, or you're just making assumptions?
We could contemplate such a situation, Your Lordship.
Can you say that the indebtedness under this agreement will be so huge that it will overwhelm the entire equity capital and bring it on par with RRPR? Or is it
Your
a
Lordship,
heap of...
forgive me for interrupting your Lordship multiple times. The virtual platform does create certain complications. However, your Lordships may refer to paragraph 8, your Lordships. In paragraph 8, it is clearly given that up to 60%, at a particular point, up to 60% of all the loans that Sansar Chand had, of all the loans that Sansar Chand was giving out, was in favor of SR. Secondly, about 65% of all the expenditure made by SR.
That's a percentage of Sansar Chand's balance sheet. What has that got to do with the target company?
Your Lordships, we do not know the size of the target in the present case.
So if we don't know, then we can't. It won't be fair to assume that the capital will be overwhelmed by the conversion of the loan.
However, your Lordships, there are much more serious implications to an at least 10% equity ownership. One of them being that when there are entrenchment clauses in the Articles of Association, then Sansar's SCFL has an effective veto in such decisions.
So, sorry, Counsel. I think just what I'm confused about in all this is what are the specific rights you're looking at to say control is established? You've discussed one, which I agree with what my brother Judge says. I think at 10% threshold, nobody can argue somebody has control. So you're therefore arguing that there are other entrenched rights which would confer control under a contract. That's your contention, if I'm reading it. So could you tell us which are the ones? Because I think your other side has argued that these are merely protective. They do not on their own give control. And if you see the way the judgment has ruled in at least ArcelorMittal, you need to be driving the vehicle and you need to be, your foot needs to be in the accelerator and the brake. And are those rights such that which would give control? Is that what SEBI's argument is?
Your Lordship, you have driven me to my the second part of this agreement, which also confers control of the variety that your Lordships are describing roughly. Clauses 17.2, 17.3, 17.4, and 17.5 were also added in pursuance of the amendment of 2018. Your Lordship, just as an aside, I would like to say that if we look at the way in which the amendments have been made, and also look at the chart that has been given in paragraph 18, as the financial performance of SR has been on a decline, the rights that SCFL has captured have been on an increase. They have been much more pervasive. Now coming back to the point, your Lordship, 17.2, 17.3, 17.4, and 17.5. 17.2 is a clincher, your Lordship, on the point of control, because here the borrower must request firstly a list of recommendations for the appointment of CEOs and for the appointment of independent directors. And thereafter, SR can only pick from the list of recommendations that SCFL provides. Now, there is no qualification on the kind of names that must arrive in this list of recommendations. The list of recommendations might comprise of only persons who are favorable or who are known to SCFL. Now, this creates a situation where there might be any individual who selected out of the list of recommendations is a person who is a known entity, who is a known variable to SCFL, and therefore SCFL can nefariously thereafter control the management, the day-to-day working of SR. Your Lordship, therefore, your Lordship, there is the control over day-to-day affairs. Furthermore, it's not just the power of appointment, but the power of firing that SCFL exercises control over.
But Counsel, there is I think again, you are trying to highlight the importance of those decisions. But I think what we are missing here is the nature of the decision making. As my brother judges have said, it's only a negative decision making. They cannot propose, they cannot initiate, they can only veto. And that is really the heart of what we are discussing about. So highlighting the importance of the decision, the fact it's a CEO may not really help us, because ultimately the lender of such a significant nature needs some protective rights. So the real question is, does that amount to control? So just because these are important decisions, that doesn't change it can be 15 decisions, it can be 2 decisions. That doesn't really help us.
Indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, if I may just reiterate, here the list of recommendations is a question, the kind of names that may appear within it.
That is speculative.
Your Lordship, but again, the list of recommendation is within the sole discretion of SCFL. This is not speculative. This is given within the contract. The kind of names that appear within the list of recommendations is purely within the domain of SCFL. That being the case, the kind of names being unqualified, the qualifications are determined by SCFL. Your Lordship, here the sieving mechanism is such that at the threshold, the kind of persons who may be selected as CEO is first filtered through by SCFL. SCFL gives a nominee list of recommendations to SR, and thereafter SR picks one of them. Your Lordships, in this case, there is a deep and pervasive control, and these kind of persons have the potential to control day-to-day management of the company.
Yes, but don't you think that's a case of a joint control?
Your Lordship, if the scope of our
if at all we were to accept it, how can we then say that Sansar Chand then has control, if ultimately the power to decide is going to be with the company itself?
Your Lordship, I shall address your question. However, after addressing my question, could I move on to my next submission and thereafter?
Please do. Yes, of course.
Your Lordship, on this point, forgive me, Your Lordship, while I was saying that I may have, the question may have slipped. If you could reiterate just the main points of the question.
Yeah. So the main point I made, and you can move on from after that, that's fine. The question is, how do we determine if does joint control amount to control? So that's the key question, and then please move on.
Your Lordship, indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, in the present case, there is no joint control over management. In the present case, it could just come to a position where there's a sole control, because now it is understandable. Section 179 states that board shall have final control over the KMP. In fact, more specifically, Rule 8, Clause 2 of the Companies Rules 2014 states so. However, the final control over KMP, after the decision has been made by the board, would still rest with Sansar Chand. It would still rest with SCFL, because SCFL now can go back and tell the CEO to overrule the decision of the board on day-to-day matters, and thereafter SCFL may take a call. The issue is very practical. Therefore, Your Lordships, control in this agreement is pervasive. This added with 17.4, which talks about the refusal, which talks about removal of these key managerial personnel, including technical personnel, Your Lordship. This together, operating in tandem, would result in SCFL being conferred effective control over SR. If Your Lordships are convinced, I shall move on to the second leg of my submissions, which is that Aham Nagraj is potentially disqualified from directorship if all the Lordships on the bench are in concurrence.
Yeah, please go ahead, and I think just address your opposing counsel's view that the amendment in 2018 was critical in the analysis of whether or not this was there.
Your Lordship, the 2018 amendment to the present agreement, facility agreement, is critical in that it confers control. It is, just as I have explicated, Your Lordships, 17.2, 17.3, 17.4 plus 20.1.c plus, Your Lordships.
Sorry, Counsel, to interrupt. This is on your second argument, on the managing director argument.
Oh, indeed. I shall come.
So there's a 2018 amendment to the Companies Act 167, which and that's one of the main reasons your opposing counsel had used. Okay.
Indeed, Your Lordship. I shall address that point specifically. Your Lordships, on the point of whether Aham Nagraj is disqualified, it is no dispute that Aham Nagraj is a non-executive director, as has been furnished in Annexure B on page number 15 for Your Lordship's reference. However, a person being a non-executive director is by no means a panacea to any ills that he might cause within an organization, or he might be a part of within an organization. Your Lordship, 149 clause 12 is a limited safe harbor in the sense that if a non-executive director has knowledge, however, he has neither consented in, connived in, nor acted in a complete lack of diligence, in such cases, such non-executive director cannot be made liable for any default under the Companies Act. Under the Companies Act. Now, Your Lordship, in the present case, we will be pressing upon the point that there was a lack of diligence. Lack of diligence specifically because when Mr. Bryan declined to sign the annual financial statements in the year 2016, what the company could have done, since there were 3 directors, the majority was 2. Now, the decisions of the board are required to be taken by a majority. Any question that arises before the board must be taken by a majority. This is also in the model articles of association provided in table left. The specific article is Article 68, Clause 1. Your Lordship, therefore, the majority could have taken a stand and said, we approve of the annual financial statements. The annual financial statement shall be signed and thereafter shall be filed before the ROC as required under section 137. However, none of this was done. Here, the argument may be that they were trying to arrive at a consensus. However, a consensus is not a surrogate for a statutory obligation. The statutory obligation is that annual financial statements must be filed every year. It could have been filed in 2016. It wasn't filed in 2016. Therefore, Aham Nagraj, being a party to that lack of prudence, to that lack of diligence, is certainly not entitled to the protection under section 149 clause 12. Therefore, section 160, therefore 164 will be attracted and 167 subsequently. Now, addressing your lordship's question on the effect of the 2018 amendment. The 2018 amendment merely states that such disqualified director under 169 clause 2 shall automatically vacate his position from all the other companies except the defaulting company. Your lordships, if you may provide me 1 extra minute, I shall conclude my argument. Except the defaulting company. The effect of this provision will be that this individual, Aham Nagraj, will only be left with the directorship of the defaulting company, which in the present case is Nero Private Limited, and he will necessarily have automatically vacated his position as managing director in SR. This is the effect of the amendment of 2018 on the position of directorship in Southern Rocks of Aham Nagraj. If your lordships are satisfied on this point, I shall conclude. I shall merely give a nutshell of everything that I have said, and thereafter I shall yield to my co-counsel.
Maybe we're just going to summarize again. Let the other counsel start.
If this is not, if it is not required by your lordships, in that case I shall yield. It was an honor arguing before this bench, and my co-counsel shall be dealing with appeals number 1 and 3.
Good evening, your lordships. I am counsel number 2, a co-prime auditor. I will be representing the respondents in appeal number 1 and appeal number 3. Your lordships, the primary question in appeal number 1 pertains to whether Pacific Crest, that is the respondent in the incident appeal, breached the offer agreement dated 2nd January 2020, thereby violating the SEBI Merchant Bankers Regulations 1992. In brief, I'll be referring to as the SEBI MB regulation. Your lordship, in this regard, the respondent submits that the invocation of the MAC clause was well within the contractual rights of the respondent, and thereby such an action is consistent with the code of conduct under the SEBI MB regulations. Your lordships, I'll be making the first submission, that is adversus amounts to an MAC under the offer agreement. Your lordship, it is submitted that adversus amounts to a material adverse change. Under the offer agreement on Annexure D, MAC has been defined to include any change, event, development, or effect that could be reasonably be expected to have a material adverse change on the finances of a party. This can be found on Annexure D, Clause 2N on page 16 of the report. Lordships, adversus in the instant case was an outbreak that registered nearly 3,000 cases in the first month of the infection. Furthermore, the pandemic had caused an economic slowdown, sudden step down in the stocks, reduced spending, and an overall consumer demand was at an all-time high. This can be identified from paragraph 16 on page 7 of the report. Lordships, in such circumstances, Even Southern Rock too indicated that their luxury resorts in Kerala had been very hardly hit, and approximately 50% of their revenue in the business hotel segment was lost due to adverses, and its dependency on South Asian clientele also lost out its revenue. This has been indicated on paragraph 17 on page 8 of the report. Therefore, your lordships, taking all the above into consideration, the respondent submits that adverses squarely falls within the ambit of material adverse change, and the invocation was well within the.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I think we hear you on this point. The main contention of the appellants was that it doesn't necessarily impact the finances in its entirety. And more importantly, they have made the argument quite strongly that there is no long-term impact. So could you please address that more specifically?
Indeed, Your Lordship, there are three essentials which this council will be basing its argument on. That is three essentials from the Delaware jurisprudence, Your Lordship, as rightly pointed out by the Honorable Bench. There has been a lot of jurisprudence with regards to MAC in the context of mergers and acquisition. However, broadly, they can be applied in the instant case as well. Your Lordship, adverses in the instant case strikes at the purpose of the transaction. And this was held in the case of WPP Tempus, a United Kingdom case. Your Lordship, it is pertinent to note that the role of a merchant banker in the instant case, he is responsible for the making of arrangements regarding selling, buying, or subscribing, and also to render advisory services. This is under the regulation 2CB of the SEBI MB regulations. From the above, it emerges quite clearly that a merchant banker not only advises the company, but a range of investors across the board, and therefore, in the instant case, the MAC has been rightly. Furthermore, there was a poor demand to the appellant's initial public offering. This can be perused from paragraph 14 on page 7, and hence a professional judgment was taken. Furthermore, Your Lordship, the claim that adverses was an industry-wide effect is untenable, as there are certain entity-specific risks in the instant matter. Your Lordship, the appellants have not brought a very key information to the notice of this bench. Adverses was largely concentrated in Kerala, paragraph 15 on page 7 of the moot proposition, a state which accounts for 55% of Southern Rock's total revenue contribution. Page 4, paragraph 8 of the moot proposition. Therefore, the council on behalf of the appellants have misguided this court on the short-term finances of the appellant. If I may draw the attention of
counsel, I think their point was slightly different, that the argument was more that the clause can be invoked as per Delaware and other jurisprudence only if the impact is long-term. So it may have had a short-term impact. They're not quarreling about that. But their argument is this is only a short-term issue, and what are the long-term consequences?
Indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, it is submitted that the impact in the instant case is durationally significant. In addition to the case mentioned by my learned counsel from the appellants, even INRE IVP versus Tyson Foods, a landmark case, again, mentions the same, Your Lordships. It should be noted that, Your Lordship, adverses had severely impacted the hospitality sector owing to travel restrictions, including a ban of domestic and international tour groups. Page 17, Annexure E of the proposition. Furthermore, there was no cure for the said pandemic, and it was a disease incomparable to any that was found in Asia. Again, on page 7, paragraphs 15. Therefore, it cannot be concluded at this juncture how long the advent of adverses will continue. Furthermore, Your Lordship, the report by Libgen also indicated as to how the twin effect of Mumbai terror attacks and swine flu had caused a steep decline in the average revenue per room figures for financial years 2008 to 2009 and financial years 2009 to 2002 successive financial years. Therefore, if a parallel can be run to the instant case as well, Your Lordship, adverses impact is definitely durational. 2 years for any investor to bet on the stock markets is really huge, Your Lordship, and therefore that has to also be consideration while adjudicating upon the submission made by the appellants.
But counsel, in that regard, no matter how much impact it may have had, is it not something that we need to look at in line with the obligations of your client under the merchant bankers regulation? So, if the IPO could not have been done in January, February, or even up to early part of 2020, it could have been done a little later. Was it not, something mala fide on part of your client to, wash the hands off the deal and effectively, as they have suggested, chase another client? So while we consider, if we look at the MAC clause in its isolation, that's one thing. But if you look at the MAC clause in the light of the merchant bankers regulation, then I think your client's conduct does not seem to have been above board.
Indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, with regards to the first question, that is, the IPO could have taken place thereafter. Your Lordships, as previously stated, the advent of adversaries is still not determined. Moreover, Your Lordships, it is well within the contractual rights of the respondent to invoke the material adverse change clause. Your Lordship, I'll deal in detail with regards to the SEBI and regulations. However, I request this honorable bench to consider the contractual right in itself of the respondent to terminate the offer agreement if a material adverse change clause is rightly invoked. With regards to the second question as well, Your Lordship, with regards to malafide intentions, Your Lordship, there is no malafide intention with regards to the termination. If I may direct Your Lordship, direct the honorable bench's attention to paragraph 19 on page 8. As previously discussed, Your Lordship, there was unsubstantiated reports. The malafide intention can be only related to our association, our possible association, in fact, Your Lordship, with fig leaf. Your Lordship, quite clearly the moot proposition says that these are unsubstantiated reports. Moreover, Your Lordship, even if this is taken into consideration, it must be noted, Your Lordship, again under Annexure D, that is the offer agreement. If at all the offer agreement is rightly invoked, we can very well deal with a direct competitor of the appellant, and this can be found in clause 21.3 in Annexure D, page 16 of the book. Therefore, Your Lordship, even the malafide argument will not stand. Moving on to my second broad submission under appeal number 1, Your Lordship, it is submitted that the termination of the offer agreement does not violate the SEBI MB regulations at all. In fact, the conduct is in consonance with the obligations under the SET. Your Lordship, every merchant banker is required to make all efforts to protect the interests of the investor. Paragraph 1 of Schedule 3 of the SEBI MB regulations. Fulfill its obligations in a prompt and professional manner. Paragraph 3. And exercise independent professional judgment. Paragraph 4. Your Lordship, furthermore, the objective of SEBI is to promote orderly and healthy growth of securities market and for investor protection. This has been provided under the Statement of Objects and Reasons of the SEBI 1990. Therefore, Your Lordship, it is submitted.
Counsel, sorry, I have a question there. So, point taken, all these aspects of code of conduct are important, but is the only way to exercise or discharge these obligations through termination of MOU, or through walking away from the deal, or through engagement with the client?
Your Lordship, with regards to the termination, I would like to reiterate that these are in fact in line with what was agreed by the appellant and the respondent. That is the merchant banker and the issuer. Therefore, quite clearly, when the obligations and the duties and responsibilities of both the parties have been clearly provided under Annexure D, it is submitted that, Your Lordship, it is very well in.
Let me be more specific in that case. You know, the definition of material adverse change or effect says it in the sole discretion of the merchant banker acting reasonably. How important is the emphasis on the word acting reasonably? Have you acted reasonably? Were you supposed to speak to your client about the reasons for you to walk away from the transaction, and if something else could be done to protect the investors given the situation?
Your Lordship, the definition, the reasonability aspect provided under the said provision is very much important, and therefore we rely on that. In the instant case, we submit that the actions are very reasonable in nature, Your Lordship. With regards to informing the other party with regards to the termination as well, Your Lordship, the same can be found on paragraph 19. Therefore, there was a clear notice of termination as well in the instant case. Your Lordship, therefore, the entire question therefore draws down to whether the respondent in the instant case has rightly invoked the material adverse change. It is a submission that in light of the circumstances as previously stated, Your Lordship, there are certain entity-specific risks that are associated with the appellant in the instant matter, and also wide market risks that have to be taken into consideration by the honorable bench. Your Lordships, if there are no questions at this juncture, I seek permission of this honorable bench to proceed to appeal number 3.
Can I have para 11?
Indeed, Your Lordship. Yes, Your Lordship.
So it seems you considered fig leaf earlier, and then you thought Southern Rocks would do better. You dumped them, jumped to Southern Rocks. Then you hit some rough weather with Southern Rocks. You dumped them, jumped to fig leaf. Is this the kind of conduct that is considered professional, or is this something that's just mercenary in terms of whichever way the wind blows, you just want to get some IPO done, get into the league tables, rather than handle them through the storm? In 11, it seems you dumped Fig Leaf once.
Indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, there is no clear facts on record to indicate that we indeed have an association with Fig Leaf thereafter. Your Lordship, all of this is just a mere assumptions at this juncture, Your Lordship. Furthermore, Your Lordship, the said contract itself, Annexure D itself says if MAC is rightly invoked, we can associate with the direct competitor. Therefore, there is no blanket ban on us not to associate ourselves thereafter with Fig Leaf. Your Lordship, with regards to paragraph 11 as well, yes, indeed, Your Lordship. Initially, we definitely did have discussions with Fig Leaf. However, thereafter chose the initial public offering of the apple. However, Your Lordship,
what about
no
para 18? Para 18, the graph suggests everything's going up, expenditures up, revenues up. It's business as usual.
Your Lordship, I just conclude my submission with regards to paragraph 11. Your Lordship, there is no reasonable merchant banker would disassociate himself from an issue that is 3,250 million. The Southern Rock's issue size is around 3,250 million. To go and associate himself with a 1,500 million issue size of Fig Leaf, the direct competitor in question. Lordship, therefore, that aspect should be negated by this honorable bench. Now, Your Lordship, with regards to the graph, Your Lordship, I would like to draw your attention to page 7, paragraph 17, just above, Your Lordship. The officials clearly communicated two impacts caused to the merchant bankers, these officials being the officials of the appellates. They state that the luxury resorts in Kerala have been very hardly hit by adversities, approximately 50% of their revenue. Therefore, this graph is only till 31st December 2019, before the advent of adversities. Therefore, we are not aware of, in fact, if 50% and these two are taken into consideration, a reasonable conclusion is there is a significant depreciation in the finances of the appellants.
So would you handhold a client and say, postpone your IPO, take the following steps to keep the pot boiling, and we look at the market afresh, or would you rather dump them and move on? That's the question, really. Your conduct is being examined from a professionalism point of view.
Your Lordship, if I may draw your attention to the obligations under the Articles of Association, there was an IPO obligation of the merchant bank. Therefore, with all, if I may draw your attention to page 4, clause E, Your Lordship, the initial public offering of shares should have been, there is a condition, Your Lordship, before the end of
how does that
year
affect a merchant banker? How does that affect a merchant banker?
Indeed, Your Lordship. Therefore, Your Lordship, there is a clear, a reasonable conclusion can be made to the fact that the appellants will proceed with the initial public offering despite the advent of adversities. Therefore, in the light of the obligation, it is reasonable enough.
As a banker, you'll know that hundreds of companies have such obligations, and if they can't be met, this is what would be called a directory obligation rather than a mandatory obligation. Shareholders who are the beneficiaries of that right to an IPO will not enforce that right. They will allow the company to prospect for a future IPO. How does that affect a merchant banker's decision to dump that client?
Yeah, I think the standard which you read out, one of them which is also there is high standards of fairness, high standards of ethical behavior. So the question the court is asking is, have you exhibited high standards? And is simply terminating the contract meeting that standard? Because surely a merchant banker is different from any regular contracting party. A merchant banker is subject to a whole lot of regulations given what its role is. So the question is and it's, terminating itself may not be an issue. The question is only by terminating could you have represented the other client. So then it's not a question of 3,200 versus 1,500 million, but it's a question of that, were you being ethically fair? Were you being, meeting all the standards which were there based on your behavior, given the fact that the only way you could help out on the other transaction, which based on whatever facts we have, at least seem to be on a better success. At least the investors seem to be there versus this one. So that's the question which we are grappling with.
Your Lordship, with regards to the termination, Your Lordship, if in a situation where every merchant banker, if at all he enters into an agreement with a problem issuer on the stock market, in such a scenario, Your Lordship, you would not be allowed to terminate itself. In the instant case, Annexure D provides for a termination clause, Your Lordship, and therefore that should be taken into consideration. Now, Your Lordship, the timing of the termination may be questioned by this honorable. However, Your Lordship, the submissions are very clear, Your Lordship, that there are no malafide intention. There is nothing on record to indicate our association with Fiji post the termination. In light of such circumstances, we request this honorable court to adjudicate and render that the invocation of the material adverse change clause and the subsequent termination to be well within the code of conduct under the SEBI MB regulations. Now, Your Lordship, with regards to high standards and thereafter, Your Lordship, it must also be noted that there are certain professional obligations that the merchant banker is also required to do under the initial public offering. Your Lordship, he may have certain underwriting obligations. He might have other investors betting on his advice, Your Lordship, and he plays a very important role in a stock exchange with regards to transactions happening. And therefore, if the merchant banker is not allowed to take an independent professional judgment, that would render the entire intent of the SEBI policy. And therefore, that is the submission with regards to. Your Lordship, if there are no questions, and if that satisfies the questions raised by the honorable bench, I seek to move on to my next appeal,
Yes.
appeal number 3.
Please go ahead. Sorry, appeal 3, right?
Indeed, Your Lordship, the primary issue in appeal number 3 pertains to the class action suit filed by the investor shareholders against Southern Rocks and Aham and Brahmas, the initial promoters. 3 broad arguments will be made by the council in order to substantiate the submissions. Firstly, the elements of class action suit are not satisfied. Secondly, the right of first refusal has no force of law and does not require to be nullified. And lastly, the investor shareholders are not entitled to any damages. Your Lordship, this particular submission was not made by the appellants in their oral submissions. However, I'll be making that in light of the written submissions. They have in fact mentioned as 0.5 in their prayer. So I will be making that submission as well. Lordships, with regards to my first submission, the appellants have the essentials of class action suit are not satisfied in instant matter. 2 essentials primarily. Firstly, the essential of commonality is not satisfied. Lordship, for commonality of claims, there should first exist a valid cause of action to pursue this law. In the case of Managing Director BCI Hyderabad versus Karunathur, it has been held that a valid cause of action can only arise for a legal injury or damage that has already occurred and does not account for any future act unless extremely probable. In the instant case, therefore, Your Lordship, the shareholder agreement in itself is invalid in the eyes of law. The submissions regarding this will be made subsequently. The second essential, Your Lordship, there is no requirement to pursue the class action suit. Jurisprudence indicates, Your Lordship, that a class action should be encouraged in instances where the class is so numerous such that it is impracticable for all of them to be joined as parties. Rule 85(1)(a) of the National Company Law Tribunal, which 2016. In the present case, the number of investor shareholders forming the class is only 8. That can be identified from paragraph 6 on page 3 of the Moot proposition. Your Lordship, hence the balance of convenience is against the formation of a class to institute a suit in the instant.
Counsel, there's 2 questions on that. Firstly, regarding your first point about what is the loss or damage cost, I think whether it's retrospective or prospective, whether it's a past loss or a future loss, their point that the appellants have made is that this the conduct amounts to prejudice. So can you advance arguments on what do you think is the meaning of prejudice from the point of view of your client? That's number 1. And number 2, is it not a misinterpretation of the NCLT rules and 245 to lay down a minimum threshold that there should be a certain number of investors to constitute a class action? That's an extra reading that you seem to be making into the Companies Act and the rules.
Indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, with regards to the prejudice aspect, Your Lordship, it is submitted that in instant case, the question of prejudice will not arise, Your Lordship, considering the fact that the validity of the shareholder agreement in itself is in question. That is the reason why, Your Lordship, I suggested I will proceed with my arguments on the validity of the shareholder agreement. Once it is established that shareholder agreement is not a valid contract, the questions on prejudice, the question on fraudulent behavior will not come into question.
Okay. Just to follow up on that, is prejudice not something much more wider than the validity or otherwise of a conduct? So, for example, a breach of director's duties may not constitute prejudice, but an act which is inconsistent with director's duties might constitute prejudice. So, is prejudice not different from validity or otherwise of an act or a contract?
Indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, we consider that prejudice is definitely an essential that this Honorable Court must take into consideration while adjudicating upon this here. However, Your Lordship, prejudice is something that has to be ascertained from facts and circumstances of each case. In the instant matter, Your Lordship, there is no prejudice caused at all. Your Lordship. Prejudice is such that there should be some sort of real injury to the person making such a claim.
So please advance your arguments on that, because you're initially relying on the validity or otherwise of the ROFR, which may be not necessary on its own. So maybe you can argue on other circumstances, as you said, that might or might not amount to prejudice.
Indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, in the instant case, Your Lordship, there is no, the submission, the brief submission is the fact that there is no prejudice, Your Lordship. This has to be read in light of the circumstances in the instant case, when both the parties in the instant matter have decided not to incorporate the same into the Articles of Association. The contention of the appellates will just be an assumption, Your Lordship, that in the future there will be some sort of utilization or invocation of the ROFRs. Your Lordship, in principle, such ROFRs are not valid as a submission. Your Lordship, in the case of V.B. Rangaraj versus V.P. Gopalakrishnan, it was held that if restrictive agreements are not entered into the Articles of Association, then they are not enforceable. Multiple High Court judgments, Your Lordship, Delhi High Court to be specific, H2A employees versus Hindustan Thompson and World Phone India versus WPI, both have thereafter reiterated the same position and in fact cited V.B. Rangaraj's ratio. Therefore, it is submitted, Your Lordship, that the shareholder agreement entered into is invalid and therefore does not require any nullification by this Honorable Court.
And your analysis as counsel is based on the 56 Act and not the 13 Act?
Indeed, Your Lordship, indeed.
Okay, and why would we not look at and read the provisions together with what the current state of law is under Section 58 of the Companies Act? Why should we go back to 112?
I would just like to correct myself. The Delhi High Court judgment, Your Lordship, in fact, HTA employees versus Hindustan Thompson was on the provisions of the Companies Act 2013. Your Lordship. Therefore, I stand corrected on that fact. However, Your Lordship, with regards to in the instant matter as well, Your Lordship, it is submitted that the conversion from public company to a private company will in no way hinder the validity of the contract. It's a possible argument that they may come up with, Your Lordship. However, the submission is quite clear, Your Lordship, on the date of the entering of the contract. If the agreement in question itself is not valid, then such an argument, that is the conversion from a public company to a private company, cannot be made in this one.
But a ROFR today, if I enter into an ROFR today, is that valid or not in your view? If it's not in the articles. Assume I don't put it in the articles, there is an ROFR. Would that be valid?
Your Lordship, the position, the V.B. Rangaraj's position continues even till date, Your Lordship, considering the fact that there is no express overrule on that. Therefore, restrictive agreements, if entered and thereafter not entered into the Articles of Association, they're not enforceable per se. That is the position of
and that would be, even though there's now an explicit provision under Section 58, although it's with respect to public companies, which specifically now in the explanation says that contractual provisions will be upheld, notwithstanding the free transferability. This thing. Is that your view?
Indeed, Your Lordship, therefore, there are other supplemental arguments also, Your Lordship, with regards to the validity of the contract. Now, Your Lordship, there is no animus comprehendi in the instant case. For a valid contract, there should be intention between parties to even enter into the contract. In the commercial context, Your Lordship, evidence of conduct both prior and post the agreement must be taken into consideration. Therefore, when the validity of the contract, the agreement in itself is in question, Your Lordship, therefore that particular provision will not apply as a submission of the contract.
And the validity of the contract is questionable on the basis of the ROFR, or is it based on something else?
Your Lordship, with regards to the submission in instant case is the fact that if intention and other contractual requirements are not suffice, then that will not be valid, Your Lordship. With regards to ROFR, the circumstances must be taken into consideration before adjudicating.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask you another question on this, Counsel. So in short, you are saying if two small shareholders of a company were to sign a shareholders agreement, ROFR or whatever else be the intent in the agreement, and if they don't have the influence over the company to change the articles to reflect this, then these parties are incapable of entering into a binding contract, incapable of binding themselves or the other parties. Is that your argument?
Indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, the contract is frustrated considering the fact that another statute mandates, or rather, the principle, the company law jurisprudence mandates its incorporation into the Articles of Association. Therefore,
I hope not to enforce this contract against the company, because company is not a party to the contract. Company is bound by articles. I only hope to bind the other party to the contract and enforce it against it.
Your Lordship, Your Lordship, the submission is that when the contract is void ab initio in itself, Your Lordship, the enforcement cannot happen in the instant case.
Sure, thank you.
Your Lordship, moving on to my third leg, Your Lordship, as I previously stated, the appellants in their prayer seek rupees 2,000 million before this honorable court for the fraudulent actions. Your Lordship, however, they have not substantiated how they have come to a conclusion with regards to such a figure. To begin with, Your Lordships, the appellant claim that the respondents have defrauded them. A prejudice is there. However, that such an argument is not tenable, since the validity of the SHA in itself, as previously submitted, is not valid in the eyes of the law. Therefore, non-disclosure of an immaterial information does not amount to fraud, Your Lordship, and this has been held in Bhagwan Bhai versus Life Insurance Corporation. Thus, a plaintiff is entitled to damages only to the extent of the loss caused, and in the absence, in the instant case, the said loss has not been quantified or clearly displayed before this honorable bench, damages should not be provided to the appellants. If there are no questions at this juncture, the counsel seeks permission to proceed with prayer, Your Lordships. Your Lordship, therefore, in the light of facts stated, issues raised, arguments advanced, and authority cited, the respondents most humbly pray before this honorable court, with regards to appeal number 1, declare the invocation of material adverse change clause by Pacific Crest to be well within its contractual rights, to declare the termination of the offer agreement to be in accordance with the Code of Conduct of SEBI MB regulations. With regards to appeal number 2, Your Lordships, dismiss appeal number 1 filed by SEBI to declare the rejection order dated 31st January by SEBI was in accordance with law. And with
We
regards
have
to
the
appeal number
players.
3,
We have the players. That's fine.
Indeed, Your Lordship, it was an honor argument. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lordships, the counsel seeks permission to further rebuttals. Much obliged, Your Lordships. Your Lordships, merely 4 rebuttals, crisp law points only. With respect to the second appeal, Your Lordship, my learned co-counsel specifically referred to and heavily relied upon the matter of NDTV, that is Vishwa Pradhan, which was with respect to VCPL. Your Lordship, it's necessary to note that the said counsel has unfortunately has tried to misguide the court, considering that the facts of the said case were completely different, Your Lordship, based on 3 points. Firstly, Your Lordship, that in the said order by Securities and Exchange Board of India, in the said agreement in that matter, there was absolutely no trigger with respect to the call option agreement. That is, the call option agreement therein could be exercised without any default or without any trigger whatsoever. In the present matter, there's a trigger with respect to the default of the facility agreement and non-compliance with the facility agreement, which is one of the material differences. Second material difference being that there was absolutely no tenure with respect to the call option agreement therein. That is, quoting Your Lordship, borrower at any time during the tenure of the loan or thereafter could exercise the call option agreement. Therefore, Your Lordship, it was not connected with the repayment of the loan altogether. Therein, Your Lordship, the intention was abundantly clear that the intention was to merely give effect to that call option agreement with the facade of a facility agreement. In the present matter, Your Lordship, the call option agreement is premised solely upon the repayment of the said loan. That is, only the outstanding amounts of the loan may, in any case, if there is a non-compliance, be converted into fully paid up equity shares of the company, and therefore are mere lender protection rights. Your Lordship, these distinguishing factors must be taken into consideration. Moreover, Your Lordship, with respect to the second contention, with respect to disqualification of Mr. Aham, my learned opposing counsels have failed to argue and prove as to why there might, in any case, be a retrospective application of the provisions that were of the proviso which was introduced by the said amendment. The counsel in the present matter shall merely re-aver that the said proviso shall operate prospectively and shall not apply to Mr. Aham Nagaraj's disqualification, and therefore he is unlikely to be disqualified. Thirdly, Your Lordship, my learned opposite counsel attempted to give an extremely wide definition to an MAC clause that is a wide interpretation. However, it is necessary to note, relying upon the matter that my opposing counsel has relied upon, Akon versus Phonesis Kabi, it is necessary to note that considering that the present MAC clause was extremely wide in nature and had absolutely no carve-outs, it did not mention any specific circumstances wherein such MAC clause could be invoked. Based on the test that has been laid down in the matter of Akon, it should be given a narrow interpretation, and the MAC clause should not be allowed to be invoked. Lastly, Your Lordship, my learned opposing counsel has referred to an Articles of Association of a company as the law of the land. However, it's necessary to note that the articles do bind the shareholders and the company itself, but would not bind an inter se agreement between two other parties, which is now enforceable and which would prejudice the investor shareholders in the present matter. It is therefore necessary to nullify the said ROFR, contravening ROFR, Your Lordship, in the present matter. If Your Lordships have no questions, that is all for the rebuttals, Your Lordship. Much obliged, Your Lordship.
Your Lordship's permission to reply to rebuttals. Much obliged. Your Lordships, on the first point, Council has dealt with the case of NDTV Limited at length and has tried to draw parallels between NDTV and the present case. Now, there are certain facts such as the interest rate of the loan or the period of the loan that has not been mentioned in the instant facts, Your Lordships. Therefore, and also the present facts do not specifically state that the loan that has been given is a term loan by any stretch. Therefore, Your Lordships, NDTV must be held to sternly apply to the present case as has already been dealt with. On the second question of the 2018 Company Law Amendment and the retrospectivity aspect, Your Lordship, in the case of Yashodhara Shroff versus Union of India, the Karnataka High Court had occasion to deal with Section 167, Clause 1A. Now, Your Lordship, Section 167, Clause 1A, the 2018 amendment was brought in order to remove an absurdity in the law. The absurdity being that if you were to remove all disqualified directors from all position, then a company in which such disqualified director, a defaulting company in which such disqualified director were holding a position would now be rendered directorless. So to avoid such circumstances, Section 167, Clause 1A was amended by virtue of the 2018 amendment. Now, going to retrospectivity, Your Lordship, here we must look at the point at which the burden, the liability is imposed. The liability, according to Section 164, Clause 2A, is imposed upon the default on 3 consecutive years. At any time before such 3 consecutive years, the liability shall not attach. The period at which the liability attaches is essential. Here, the liability doesn't start to get attached when the first default occurs. It attaches specifically after the 3rd default. In the present case, the 3rd default has occurred after 2018. Therefore, it cannot be said that that 167 has been applied retrospectively. It has in fact been applied properly in accordance with law. That is on the second submission, Your Lordship. The third and fourth questions do not merit responses because they have been dealt with at length by my learned co-counsel. If Your Lordships please, we shall now yield to the judgment of this Honorable Court.
Thank you.